Welcome to the Bright Ideas podcast, where we unpack innovative ways to approach course design. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Madison.
And we are instructional designers for the Lone Star College system.
Yes, so welcome to episode 5, Learning Modalities. This is a really exciting episode for us because this is our first episode in our second series on serving diverse learners.
So we just wrapped up our series on student engagement. If you haven't seen those videos, go check them out. But this time we're going to be thinking about how to meet learners who approach learning differently in online course design. So this first one's on learning modalities, and then we're also going to be talking about accessibility in our next episode, and then building online community, both student to student and instructor to student. So backtracking a little bit about what we're talking about today. So learning modalities is how to approach in terms of instruction and also what students are producing in different kinds of mediums. So a lot of times you talk about visual learners or auditory learners. So we're sort of tapping into that and thinking about what are ways to present information visually, how to use audio more creatively, and then we're also going to be talking about how to incorporate social learning, like students learning from each other as well.
Yeah, so we're going to start with visual. And like Kelsey was saying, we really wanted to think kind of outside of the box of things that we see traditionally in online courses, as well as even face-to-face courses sometimes. Mm-hmm. So the first one that we're going to talk about are videos, because we see a lot of instructors utilizing audio-visual components in their course. When we see this in their course, we typically see some kind of lecture video with text or slides of the content. So that's what we traditionally see. We wanted to kind of talk about, again, just some things that can kind of take that a little bit further. So the first one that we're going to talk about are direct address videos. So this is anytime the instructor is giving a video, really quick video, explaining instructions or assignments, maybe explaining tasks that the student has to complete in the course, as well as maybe grading expectations. So these videos aren't necessarily lectures. This is more building the narrative for your course, kind of outside of the content or traditional content. So it's giving students just a little bit more from the instructor.
Yeah, and it's really replicating the kinds of conversations you would be having in a face-to-face setting or a synchronous setting. And it's great because, we give students written instructions, but typically we also want to talk them through it. And one, it gives us a time to clarify what we're looking for. And two, it's just helpful for students who kind of take in information different ways.
Yeah, and I think too, you always want to give them multiple ways to access that information, right? So as an instructor, I always like to have it a video of me explaining the instructions too, and it was good reference to put my students back to if they had a question. So, yeah.
So another one, a way videos can be used that we want to talk about is through modeling and demos. And these can be used both similarly, like we were talking about, more from creating a narrative for the course or giving a little bit more explanation to what you're looking for, but it can also be used as a teaching method. So we see this a lot of times in math courses where an instructor will solve an equation and walk through the steps and how to solve each piece, but we don't often see this in other disciplines where it would be a really great fit. For example, my background's in history, so if you're teaching history and you're having them do a primary source analysis, actually creating a short video where you're looking at a primary source document and you're verbalizing as you're looking at it, what questions are you asking, what information are you pulling out of it, how are you approaching analyzing a primary source. I mean, there's a really great benefit from hearing from an expert and how they think about the material. And it's, a very simple modeling technique to kind of get your students closer of okay, I'm going to be analyzing a primary source and I've got this, a brief description of how to do that, but then I'm also getting to see my instructor and how they approach it.
Yeah, and this is the one piece, from experience of teaching in-person, hybrid, and online, this is the one piece that I feel like is missing a lot of the times in an online platform, but is very present and prevalent in a face-to-face course, right? I would use that as my main form of teaching, that I'm going to teach the concept and then I'm going to walk them through how to actually do the concept, right? And so when we're talking about these experiences in online platforms, right, we still want them to have a rich learning experience. And this is a great way for an instructor to create that equitability between a face-to-face course and an online course.
And something to keep in mind is these don't have to be like super high fidelity, fancy productions. I think it's actually really nice to have just an informal chat with your students and to have that more conversational moment in the course. In terms of like demos, I've seen instructors also like deciding which one to create based on like if they have a particular assignment where they're like, I've given them instructions, I've given them like an example, and I'm still like not seeing them mirroring that in the work that they're turning in. They've actually taken these demo videos and like looked at the student example and walked through, like if they have a rubric, they talk to students about, okay, this is the criteria, this is how I looked at it at this piece of work. So again, it's just picking like those right moments, whether it's a difficult concept or something you feel like could use an extra moment of clarity, or really kind of laying a foundation for skill building that some students may need.
And I think instructors oftentimes are really scared of these types of videos because they are daunting, right? Like they take a lot of time to record, and you have to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's accessible to students. But once you've made them, right? And you can kind of create this repository of these videos that you can use over and over again. I taught English, and so I would do this with like an entire paper. So maybe I modeled writing the introduction in one video. I'm going to use that same introduction to teach revision. So you have these concepts that build upon each other, and you can use that in your video progression too.
And something we also wanted to touch on, like stepping away from like the video component and thinking more visually, are infographics and graphic organizers.
Yeah, so these are just going to be a way to visually represent information. And what's great about them is they're 1 to 2 pages typically, and it's just a way for your students to visually see information quickly. And so this is a great thing to have included in maybe a unit of study, because it's going to tap into your visual learners, right? So with infographics, that's usually just like specific concepts or maybe just like a map out of the information. And with graphic organizers, you actually have like the parts that are showing the full whole, right?
Right, and this is really helpful because it kind of gives students like visual buckets to when they're getting this information from the textbook, from the lecture slides, they can kind of like start sorting it, and it kind of tells them, okay, this is how the larger picture of how things are working together, which in some courses is really important. I know for a lot of science courses like biology, anatomy, and physiology, like these units are not segmented. So even using these to connect previous information with the current content that they're going to be studying can be helpful.
So that was kind of our visual components in kind of planning your course. Now we're going to tap into something called micro-learning. So micro-learning is just what it sounds like, right? Small learning moments. Typically we see these in videos that are like 3 to 5 minutes long that focus on kind of smaller segments of your content. And it's something that you can add to your course to help kind of supplement what you're already offering your students.
And it's a great way to make content a little bit more digestible for learners. So even if you have like a 30-minute lecture video, you can use video editing tools and cut it down into the specific topics. And basically, it's helpful because it basically chunks the information for students already. And both when they're like going through the content, so studying it for the first time and reviewing the material, it creates a very easy roadmap to like for that at moment of need learning. Like if they're very familiar with a concept, maybe they don't need to sit through the entire video for that one, but this one they definitely need to watch. So both like when they're going into study, but also like when they're reviewing and preparing for the exam, they're like, okay, I need to review topic Y. They can go and immediately find it. They're not having to watch the entire lecture. And also this is just very familiar to students in terms of how they're used to consuming content in these kind of short little moments, very focused.
Yeah, and it creates that level of like personalization, right? Students nowadays don't want to waste their time, right? They want to make sure that they're maximizing it. So it's a way for them to personalize that experience.
So that kind of wraps up what we were thinking from the instructional side of visuals, but we wanted to give a small little moment to audio only and what that can look like in your course.
Yeah, so, you know, we don't typically see audio a lot, like just straight up audio. It usually has some kind of visual component with it. But something that we think is a really great tool for instructors to use in addition to the content that they already have created is podcasts. So if you're watching this, like this is a visual podcast, right? But typically, you know, you get a lot of just audio. And what's great about these is, I think one of the greatest things, let me rephrase that, is that it isn't just like typical, like, here's your information, here's my lecture, here's your information. They typically run in kind of like a conversation or even like narrative. And so you have, you know, free access to all these different topics within podcasts. And so it's a great way to incorporate just a different variety of learning types, right?
And it also is really helpful to have this option for students who maybe don't have a lot of time to sit down in front of the computer and watch, you know, everything that is on the screen. So like they can listen to podcasts when they're commuting, when they're cooking,
cleaning. I love doing it when I'm cleaning. Yes.
And you can, of course, always make your own, but there's really a lot of great content already out there that is education specific or discipline specific. And as Madison was mentioning, most of these are free. You can get them on Spotify, was it Apple
Podcasts?
Apple Podcasts. And, you know, it doesn't have to be an entire lecture. You could even put these into activities. I've seen these used in discussions, so where the actual like prompt is listening to the podcast. And then maybe a follow-up question, and students are responding to that. So it's a way to just kind of have a different like lens of digesting information. And also I really love like hearing from other people in the field. I've listened to podcasts where they pull like experts from the discipline and they talk about their work. And it's just a really great way to kind of bring your subject alive as well.
Yeah. So the last modality that we're going to talk about from the instructional standpoint is going to be social learning or learning from others. And so what this means is just students are interacting with one another within the content. Traditionally, we see this in like a physical classroom as like a turn and talk, or anytime they're working on like a group project. And so that's not always applicable to online spaces. So what we're going to talk about are ways that you can kind of scale down these moments in your course online so that it's still equitable and it's still giving that authentic experience to your students.
So one of the ways you can incorporate social learning is through peer feedback. In online courses, you know, that are asynchronous, you're not going to have those like live conversation moments, but there are still ways to get students to learn from each other, and it can be really helpful because like how they think through a process, you know, one student may connect better with than another. One thing that I've really loved seeing is where you have like after a unit or on a specific topic, asking students to create some sort of like learning product of what they've learned. So it could be like an infographic. It could even be like an example that they create. That's really great for like physics and math courses. It could also be like them talking through how they solve a problem, or you know what they're brainstorming for their project, and they share that out with the discussion. And after that is when students one, they get to see what other people are doing, how they're thinking about a problem, how they're kind of connecting all this information, and they can also give feedback. And I think that ties into like important skills that students need just in general beyond the classroom. And it's not this big group project assignment, and it's not coming at the end of learning. They're really getting this moment to, one, process for themselves and reflect on how am I going to create something based on what I understand and what I don't understand. But they're getting to ask questions and have moments of inquiry with each other. And, you know, a lot of times, like even using what other students have created to help them learn and study.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to hear from your peer than like your instructor.
Yeah, because they're like first-time learners like you.
Yes, yeah, so they can kind of work that out on their own. I typically did this with like live documents. So as an English instructor, maybe they were putting their paper up there and I paired them, or maybe they had some people to choose from, and then they would share those documents with each other, and they would use the comments feature within that software, that program, and they would have basically like a conversation going on within that live document. So they're actively writing this paper, they're getting the feedback from their peers and from me, and then they could go in and change those things, because the whole point of feedback is that you use it, right? So yeah, so it's not coming at the end of the process, that they actually have a running record of what's going on as they're actually writing it. So they're, again, low stakes moment where they're actually learning from one another, and it took so much of the load off of me as a teacher. As an instructor, I literally could go in and just make sure that the stuff that they were giving was good and constructive and of worth. And then I wasn't the sole provider of that feedback. Right. So they really were learning from each other, and then I was moderating it. So really great way to incorporate them talking to one another that isn't just discussions.
And this really leads into something else we wanted to touch on, is not just different ways as an instructor to present information, but also thinking about different modalities in terms of what students are producing in your course. So not just, I mean, a lot of what we see is like text-based, or like they're doing like quizzes and assessments, but having things like where they're recording themselves, like, you know, maybe for their topic for a paper, you know, have them do an audio recording. I used to work a lot with students for like writing consultations, and a lot of them really had roadblocks when they had to sit in front of a piece of paper and start writing. So we would actually just put the paper away and have them talk through like what they were thinking about. That comes a lot more intuitively, I think, for a lot of people, because it's the main form of communication and it's separate from writing. So think about like those moments where it could be really helpful to have students like talk through something or explain something to you. Like, is that more valuable to you than having them being able to like write something? Can they like explain it coherently to another person?
Right. I did this a lot with like one-pagers, and honestly, I probably had some motive, you know, my own motives as an instructor, because it basically was one page that I would have control as an instructor of like what went on the page, but then the students really could kind of make it their own. But it would give me a really quick understanding of like who got it and who didn't get it.
Like
right?
a snapshot.
Yes,
okay.
yeah. And it was just a different way. Like it was almost like a visual like summary of information. And so it was really easy for me to grade it, because I wasn't having to like sit there and like read a bunch of things, right? Mm-hmm. It had visuals, it had text. So I typically did it at the end of maybe like a novel unit where they had to read novels, and I had to see if they like comprehended what they read. And so it was, again, a really easy way for me to make that determination of which students really got it and which ones didn't. So again, any of these things that we've talked about, like instructionally, you can flip that script and you can have your students create those things too. And what's great about if you actually include those things in your course, it gives them reference. So like if I'm wanting them to make an infographic, and I use infographics in my course, they're gonna have a better understanding of what an infographic is and what different ones look like. Same with videos, right? So you really have a lot of ways that you you can tailor this for your course and your content. And so that is just basically kind of what we wanted to reiterate on, is that one of these is not better than the other, right? The whole name of the game here is that you're using a variety. Right. So if in your unit of study you have videos, you have an infographic, you have your lecture, right, materials and readings, you're good, right? Yeah. We want to see that variety because not all of our students are the same types of learners. Mm-hmm. So you have the ability to really reach and access different types of learners.
So that really is this episode. And if you are a Lone Star faculty or adjunct and you'd like to talk with us about different ways you can bring new learning modalities into your course, you can always schedule an appointment with us. You can book us on VTAC.
So our next episode is going to be on accessibility and how you can improve accessibility within your course. And please make sure to like and subscribe this video and our channel so that you can get live updates as they come in. And yeah, that's it.
Bye.
Bye.